Hey everyone, my name's Alexandra and I am a watercolor artist. Last summer I posted a tutorial on how to paint an Alpine daisy and was asked to show you guys how to paint a more detailed version of the same flower. So I am going to show you guys how to paint something a little bit more similar to this one here. If you guys want to grab your paintbrush, let's get started. First things first, supplies. You guys will need 2 cups of water. I have one for clean and one for dirty water. For paint today, I'm using a combination of Winsor & Newton's Series 2 and 3 paints, as well as Art Philosophy & Co.'s Terrain palette. Main colors that you guys will need is yellow, purple, possibly some sort of blue, red, and green. I'll have the colors listed below as well that I'm using. I have a napkin for drying my paintbrushes on. Paper, I'm using 140 pound Arches cold press watercolor paper. And lastly, for paintbrushes, I'm using Princeton Heritage Round numbers 2 and 6. So the first thing that we're going to start to do to prepare our page for our flower is simply paint where the main flower is going to be. So for this tutorial, because I'm going to go more into depth, I'm only going to paint the one flower, but if you guys want, as I did with my sample piece, you guys are more than welcome to add on those extra stems and little flowers branching off. But for my main flower, I am starting with a yellow center point to it. So I'm using my sassafras yellow here, and I'm going to kind of center it towards the top quarter of my page. And then we are just going to paint in a yellow circle with our paintbrush. I sort of have it looking a little bit more like a dome where the bottom half is a little bit straighter, and I'm leaving a tiny bit of white space inside, so I'm not painting a solid yellow circle. I'm leaving some white space there. So that is our step 1. We're gonna wait for that to dry just a little bit, but in the meantime, I'm gonna get my purple paint ready. So for my first layer, I want to start with it being nice and watered down. I have my purple here, it's quinacridone magenta, and I'm just mixing it with a bit of blue because I want it to start a little bit cooler, and I'll add in some warmth as we go. The first layer of our petals are going to be really, really light. So I'm testing it on my napkin to make sure that it's not too dark. And now that I've done that, I'm actually gonna go in and I'm just gonna lay down that first layer of my petals. So I have the edge is rounded off, and then I'm carrying my petals in towards that center yellow. And I'm okay if the colors mix just a little bit. I actually really like the effect that it gives. So for this flower today, we're specifically going to work on a lot of layering, a little bit of glazing technique, and just really being intentional with each layer that we do to end up with the best end result that we can. So you'll notice that with me painting these petals, I have them not all super uniform and straight. Often if you're looking at flowers out in the wild, especially these ones, you'll notice that the petals will kind of be scattered. I don't know if that's the right way to say it, but they're not all super uniform. So I'm adding in my layers. I can make 1 or 2 looking like they're kind of sitting behind. And the idea is that I'm just following that oval shape. These ones towards the bottom, I want them to look a little bit longer than the ones that I have up top here. And then as I come towards the top of my flower, I'm not going to show as much of the petal because I still do want it to look like it's opening upwards. The other thing you'll notice that I'm doing is making sure to be leaving lots of white space in my painting. All right, now I have base layer of that done. We're gonna do the first layer as well of the stem and a few leaves. So for this first layer, same as with everything else we're doing, we're gonna start with a really light green. So I'm mixing this willow tree green with a little bit of my balsam and a tiny bit of vine leaf just to warm it up a bit. Now, for our stem, we are gonna work quickly and do a little bit of a wet on wet technique in this, just to really add the depth that you can see that I've done with my sample painting. So I am gonna start sort of from somewhere in the leaves there, and I'm gonna carry my stem down, have it be a little bit wavy, coming straight down. And now while it is wet, moving relatively quickly, I'm gonna go in with some of my vine leaf green, and I'm just painting it onto that left side. Now you'll see that my stem has started to dry as I've been doing this. So what I can do is wet my paintbrush, and I can go back in and just add some water so that it really bleeds in. All right, so first layer of that is done. Now I'm gonna paint in my leaves. Same idea, sticking with this really nice light green. I'm gonna put the tip of my paintbrush down on my paper, and I'm applying pressure as I pull back in sort of a wave type shape. So I'm actually gonna switch to a larger brush here. So I find it helps to have a little bit more coverage with your brush. So tip of my paintbrush is down. Pressure as I pull back, and I'm sort of waving my brush. And I'll do the second leaf up higher. Same idea, tip of my brush is down, applying pressure as I pull back. I'm sort of waving it, and then while it's still wet, we're gonna go in and just add in some darker green to make it stand out really nicely. Okay, so our first layer is done. If you guys wanted to do a really simple Alpine daisy, then this is sort of where I'd recommend you start. Maybe go a little bit darker with some of the purple on there. But we want to go into more of an intermediate to advanced flower. So in that case, we are gonna start adding details to everything that we've been painting, starting with this center yellow circle. So I'm going in and I'm mixing my paints together, and I'm actually just going to switch to a smaller paintbrush. So to really make the center of our flower stand out, we're going to add some detail to add that texture to it. So I'm going to go and mix in, I have a burnt sienna color here. So I'm going to mix some of that with some of my red paint. And then I want to mix it with just a touch of brown to sort of tone it down just a little bit. I can even add a little bit of blue in there if I want to tone it down more. So now that I've done that, I'm going into my flower, and with really, really small paint strokes, I just want to add more definition to the center point. So what I'm doing is I'm painting almost like little upside down U or upside down sort of horseshoe shapes. And the idea is that that is giving it some more texture, some more definition, but I really want to be careful that I'm letting the yellow still shine through and show through as the main portion of the center of my flower. So once that's done, I'm going to go in the bottom and follow kind of the same thing, but again, I'm being very careful to let that yellow stay the main focal point. once this dries, I'm going to add in a little bit more yellow just to increase the vibrancy there. So now that that's done, we can go in and add more details to each of our petals. So for this, I'm going to mix my purple as well as a more blue version of the purple, and I'll have the two ready to go on my palette here. And using my small brush, I'm gonna start adding that detail into my petal. So I'm gonna start from this petal on the left-hand side here, and starting from the very tip of it, I'm going to paint little lines stroking down. So I'm just bringing that color in towards the center. And now with kind of this more blue color that I've painted, I'm gonna carry some of that through. So I can move from petal to petal, and I'm just carrying that color out. I like using the combination of both with that more blue undertone as well as the more warm undertone. I find that it just brings the petals to life more, and it gives so much more interest when you're looking at it to see the variation in colors. So I'm just adding these blue lines, and you'll notice I'm keeping it towards the center of the petal so that you still really get that definition and separation of the petals. But also this little part here where the yellow kind of bled into the purple, it gives it just a really neat effect. So now, as I did with that first flower, I'm gonna go in with my brighter purple, and I'm just gonna work it into some of these petals, connecting it with that blue that I've added. I actually don't want to do it with every single petal that I have, just because I want to make sure that you really can see the difference between each of them, and also that I'm not making my flower look too busy and like there's too much going on. So working from the top, I'm working my way down, and I'm varying how much shading I'm doing and how much detail I'm adding to each petal. So now for this one here that kind of looks like it's sitting in behind this one that's in front, I want to make that a lot more evident and really stand out. So I can go in with my purple with a bit of darker paint and really have it look like it's sitting in behind. Now I can see with this petal, it's the same idea where it looks like it's sitting in behind. So in that case, I want to mix this darker color and have it kind of shadowed in behind there as well. So one of the big things when you're adding more detailing to your flowers is focusing on where the light is, making sure that you're not making it too busy by adding too much, but we're just adding enough detail that everything that we really want to stand out is really showcased in our painting. So now that I've done that, I'm actually going to go in and do a little bit of a glazing technique, and I'm going to go with my blue paint and paint over top of some of these petals. So you'll see how it still allows everything I've done to continue to shine through, but it just creates this really beautiful effect. So right away my flower is standing out so much more. Now we're gonna go in and add some more detail to our stem and our leaves. So first things first, I'm gonna start with my stem. And what I wanna do before I add any dark detail is I'm actually gonna use a glazing technique, and I'm going to go in with some red paint. So with my red paint, I have it really watered down, and I want to just go over portions of my stem. What this is going to do is it's going to add a lot more vibrance and interest to your stem, and it also gives it a very subtle but very natural look to it, where you don't necessarily think that when you add red on top of green. But you'll find that as we continue on and as we finish this painting, that's going to be a really key thing to taking it to the next level and taking it from more of a beginner's painting to something that is much more advanced. So now that that's done, we can go in and add some detail to our leaves. So I've shown you guys a version of this, especially if you watched the previous video, of adding detail and some veining to our leaves. But in this case, we're going to really focus on using the very tip of our paintbrush and adding that super, super fine detail. So going into my first leaf, I'm using the very tip of my paintbrush and I'm focusing on doing a really, really skinny line on top to act as that center vein. And I'm lifting my paintbrush at points where the line almost disappears and then comes back. And then we're going to work on adding really skinny, really light veins on our leaf. So the key to making this look very delicate and taking it to another level is that very, very light strokes with your paintbrush. So using your smaller paintbrush for this and really practicing how much pressure you're putting down. And then the last thing to really work on taking this to that next level is having your lines be really loose and really effortless looking. So I'm doing more lines on one side of my leaf, and I'm still going to add a few on the other, but not as many. And now I want to go into my main stem, and I'm going to add some darker paint to really make it pop and stand out. So I'm focusing on adding it to that left side, and I'm just sort of applying pressure to my paintbrush, and then I'll lift it up, apply pressure, lift it up, and just give it that bit of shading. I'll carry some of those really loose kind of scribbly lines over to the right hand side just to make it nice and cohesive. The idea is that you're adding just another level of detail. So now as I come towards the top, I want my green to fill up the space a little bit more. So I'm gonna feed some of it in between some of these petals here. And then we're gonna take that same dark green that we were using and do another layer onto our leaves. So going a bit darker this time, but I'm following that same concept of the really, really fine lines. And I'm only gonna cover some of the parts that I've already painted on, but I just want that vibrancy to match with what I've painted in the center. Next thing that we're gonna do with our leaves is take some of our sassafras yellow, and like I did with the red, I'm gonna continue with this glazing technique, and I'm just going to paint it over portions of my leaf. So this is gonna continue to add interest to my painting by adding the yellow over top of the green. It's really gonna add some vibrancy as well. And I can do the exact same thing with the stem that I have here. So now that that's done, one thing that I really want to do is make sure that the petals that I've painted are standing out where I want them to and as much as I want them to. So because the flower sort of is going to look like it's layering, I'm going to go in now with a very, very pigmented, dark, sort of purple blue color. And I want to almost paint kind of the illusion that the shadows in behind are standing out, making it so that each petal is really standing out. So to show you guys what that looks like, starting here, you can see that I have 2 petals there. I am going to go in with this darker color right in between the 2. And I'm painting what's almost going to look like a shadow that sits underneath the petals. Now the idea with this is that we're really getting things to stand out more. And I can either make it look like it's a shadow, or I can make the petal that sort of looks like it's sitting underneath be the one to be just brighter. I'm just going to take some of that paint away. You'll see why you have to be so intentional with where you're placing your petals, especially with these kinds of paintings, just because the more that you add paint to them, there's always a fine line between things looking too busy versus looking really nice and really defined. So just that tiny little added detail is making everything stand out so much more already. So I'm just going to sort of blend some of these out a little bit better. Just give that extra bit of definition. And then, as I mentioned before, we want to add some more yellow to the center of our flower, just because I lost a little bit of that vibrancy when the purple mixed into it. So I'm going to go on top and add some more in there and just make that stand out. And then, as I've been doing with all of the other layering, we'll add last touch of details is going to be to that center of our flower. So I'm mixing this dark brown sort of color, which is essentially just red, blue, and yellow. And I'm going to go over top these little lines that I painted and just add more of this darker burgundy red so they stand out very nicely. Right, and we can leave it at that, or if you want, the last thing that you could do is just add a touch more to our leaves here. So if I want, I can go over some of it with a bit of this darker green color. And I'm using it really watered down, continuing with this kind of glazing technique. And if I focus on just adding it to one side of my leaf, it'll make the other side stand out so much more, and will also just kind of smooth out some of that layering that we did with the really dark colors. So I can do the same thing with this watered down green into my stem, just to mix in that darker green that I painted just a little bit more, while still really keeping those fine details that I've added. Right, and there you guys have a much more detailed purple aster or alpine daisy. Thanks so much for following along. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like this video and subscribe to Alexandra Victoria Studio so that you guys don't miss anything else that comes out. This helps me so much as I continue to make tutorials. Also, if there is a wildflower that you would like to see me paint next, then leave a comment below and let me know. We'll see you next time.